The hidden line where risk changed meaning. No alarm marked it. No sudden drop. No clear before and after moment anyone could point to. Yet somewhere along the way, risk crossed a line and started behaving differently. This story matters now because risk is not static. It doesn't just rise or fall. It changes character. When that happens, the strategies, protections, and instincts that once worked begin to fail quietly. To understand why modern markets react the way they do under stress, we need to return to the moment risk stopped meaning what it used to. Risk is not a single phenomenon that can be fully described by any one metric. It is a composite of possibilities: probability of loss, magnitude of loss, speed of loss, availability of exit, and the degree to which the system around you will behave as expected when you need it to. Most of the time, these dimensions move together. But when risk changes character, they decouple. Losses may remain small while the ability to exit disappears. Volatility may stay contained while execution becomes unreliable. And the strategies built on the old composite assumption begin to fail not because they were wrong about one dimension, but because they never anticipated the others would separate from it. It began during a period of confidence built on experience. Participants believed they understood risk. They had models, history, stress tests. Past crises had shaped rules and responses. Risk felt measurable, containable, familiar. The first reveal was subtle. Losses didn't look larger, but they felt harder to manage. Small moves required more explanation. Minor missteps carried outsized consequences. It wasn't volatility that changed. It was tolerance. Behavior began shifting before anyone named it. Positions were sized smaller. Exits planned earlier. Hedging increased even when nothing appeared wrong. Participants acted as if the margin for error had narrowed, because it had. The hidden line appeared when risk stopped being about downside and became about access. Could you exit? Could you adjust? Could you respond fast enough when conditions changed? The question was no longer how much you could lose. It was whether you could move at all. Liquidity told the story first. It appeared generous, until it wasn't. It showed up when unchallenged, then retreated instantly under pressure. Risk was no longer evenly distributed. It clustered around moments, not positions. Institutions noticed before the public did. Risk committees rewrote assumptions. Models focused less on drawdown and more on behavior under stress. Exposure wasn't cut aggressively, but it was constrained. The system was adapting to a new definition of danger. The most unsettling part was how quiet the shift was. No headline announced it. No metric captured it cleanly. Yet everyone felt it. Risk had crossed an invisible threshold where old instincts no longer protected. The hidden line wasn't about fear. It was about fragility. And once risk changes meaning, the market doesn't warn you loudly. It waits for you to act as if nothing has changed. And then it teaches a lesson. As the new meaning of risk settled in, its effects spread quietly across the system. Decisions that once felt routine now required layers of confirmation. Trades were entered cautiously and exited quickly. The market still offered opportunity, but it demanded precision. The reveal deepened when traditional protections lost reliability. Hedges behaved inconsistently. Diversification failed at inconvenient moments. Assets that were meant to offset risk moved together when pressure appeared. Risk was no longer something you could distribute easily. The early conflict emerged inside execution. Slippage increased. Depth vanished faster than expected. Timing mattered more than thesis. Being right was no longer enough if you were late. Risk had shifted from outcome to process. Institutions adapted first. Exposure limits tightened by design, not fear. Liquidity buffers were prioritized over return. Risk teams focused on scenarios where nothing broke, but nothing worked either. The market had become vulnerable to hesitation, not collapse. The most dangerous realization was psychological. Participants stopped trusting their instincts. Experience lost authority. Past playbooks offered limited guidance. Risk had entered unfamiliar territory, where familiarity itself became misleading. This was the hidden cost of the shift. Risk could no longer be estimated cleanly. It had become conditional, dependent on behavior, coordination, and timing. The system didn't reward confidence. It rewarded adaptability. As a result, participation thinned, capital waited, decisions were delayed. The market moved more on absence than intent. Risk wasn't screaming for attention. It was whispering caution into every trade. And whispers, when ignored, have a way of turning into consequences. The hidden line where risk changed meaning was already shaping outcomes. The question was no longer whether participants would notice. It was how they would respond when the lesson became unavoidable. The tension peaked when the market was finally forced to confront the new definition of risk. Not through a crash, through friction. A moment arrived when adjustments had to be made quickly, and they couldn't be. The conflict intensified as exits clogged, not because everyone wanted out, but because too many tried to move at once. Liquidity thinned precisely where it was assumed to be deepest. What it felt like manageable exposure suddenly felt immobile. Prices moved sharply on modest pressure, not violently, but decisively. The market wasn't panicking. It was discovering that flexibility had been overestimated. Risk was no longer about loss. It was about timing. Institutions reacted immediately. Exposure was reduced across strategies. Risk models recalculated assumptions in real time. The focus shifted from valuation to mechanics, from where price should be to whether movement was even possible. Correlation rose as behavior synchronized. Assets that once absorbed stress now transmitted it. Diversification failed not because it was flawed, but because the definition of risk had changed beneath it. Everything depended on the same fragile assumption: access. The most uncomfortable realization spread quickly. Experience hadn't prepared anyone for this phase. Past crises had taught how to survive drawdowns. This moment demanded survival through congestion, through hesitation, through delay. The system hadn't broken. It had tightened. And in a tightened system, small actions carry disproportionate consequences. Decisions that once felt reversible now felt final. Every move mattered more than before. The hidden line had been crossed. Risk had fully transformed, and the market was now operating under rules most participants had never practiced living with. The lesson wasn't finished yet, but it was already impossible to ignore. The climax arrived not as collapse, but as understanding. The market finally accepted that risk was no longer something to be measured only in percentages or points. It was something to be navigated in time. Prices adjusted to reflect that reality. Liquidity returned cautiously, demanding compensation for immediacy. Participation resumed, but with restraint. The system didn't regain its old fluidity. It gained awareness. The resolution unfolded through redefinition. Risk was reframed as exposure to delay, to congestion, to coordination failure. Strategies evolved. Position sizes shrank. Exit planning became central. Survival replaced optimization. In hindsight, the hidden line had always been there. It appeared when liquidity became conditional, when execution mattered more than thesis, when behavior outweighed valuation. Risk hadn't increased. It had changed shape. Modern relevance is unmistakable. Today's markets still operate beyond that line, still punish those who assume exits will be available, still reward those who respect timing as much as direction. The lesson is not to fear risk. It is to understand it, because when risk changes meaning, old instincts become liabilities, and the market doesn't warn you twice. It simply waits for you to trade as if nothing has changed, and then it responds. Subscribe to join the journey. The practical response to risk that has changed meaning requires a fundamental reorientation of how decisions are framed. In the old environment, where risk was primarily about the magnitude of potential loss, the central question was whether the expected gain justified the expected loss. In the new environment, where risk includes a possibility that adjustment itself may be unavailable when needed, the central question becomes more complex. It requires asking not only whether the position is right, but whether the position is right enough, held with small enough size, and structured for exit early enough that even a scenario-constrained liquidity can be survived without permanent damage. This is a more demanding standard. It produces smaller positions, more frequent reassessment, and an ongoing willingness to reduce exposure that feels premature by the standards of the old risk definition. but it is the appropriate standard for a market in which the hidden line has been crossed. Those who made this adjustment earliest experienced the period as a modest inconvenience, slightly lower returns, a more cautious posture applied before it was obviously necessary. Those who delayed faced a much more disruptive adjustment. The difference was not in the information available. It was in the willingness to apply the new definition of risk before the market forced it. The hidden line does not announce itself, but it can be perceived by those paying close attention to the right signals and willing to respond before the lesson becomes unavoidable.